Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaVelas and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link in the description down below, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augment Experience podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Joshua Velas. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down every week to talk about all the latest news in the technology, business, and video game world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Velas. I'm your host as usual. And I say welcome back to the show. Today's episode 180 of the show. And before we get started, I'm going to do a bit of housekeeping quick because, well, you guys don't like to do it around here and it only makes sense that we do it. So let's get on with the house cleaning. I do want to say thank you guys for coming back and listening to today's episode. It really does mean a lot to me. You guys constantly keep taking time in your days to download these episodes, to share these episodes, to constantly keep letting me know how you feel, whether you like my opinions or not, which that's perfectly fine. But I do greatly appreciate that you guys keep coming back and, sharing some love. Also, I know this is the first time we've done a video episode in a while. So, well, here's my face again. So, nothing's changed besides a little bit of a haircut and, semi-baby face. But it's definitely been nice, like just doing the audio versions. But I feel like with today's episode, and we have a guest too, which he's not new around here. He's been around the block a couple times with us. So, Juan is back.
Hey,
he's in video, so now you guys can see his lovely face too.
That's definitely crazy. I'm like here and you can see me.
He's definitely a little bit more of a grizzled veteran than I. So he's got,
This is true.
Got a little bit more facial hair than I do. So I look like a baby compared to him.
You'll get there. Don't stress. It'll happen for you too.
I hope so. But thank you guys for coming back. Obviously, the Patreon backers, you guys are great. Thank you guys for your support. Obviously, there's also episode 180, so 20 more, and then we hit 200 of doing this show. And I think we're already at 2,500, almost pushing 2,600 total downloads. So I greatly appreciate that. Thank you guys. Obviously, you guys can, watch the video version on YouTube or listen to the audio versions on Spotify, wherever you like to listen to your podcast. But today, we're going to be talking about something a little bit heated in the tech community right now, which has spurred a lot of interesting opinions from a lot of people. Everybody has their own way of viewing things. Some people prefer to be apologists. Some people prefer to just straight up say how they feel. And I think it's only fair that we have this conversation because it's not, we just can't ignore it. Like, it'd be easy for me to just be like, oh, hey, let's talk about the Pixel 6 or something like that. Like, I feel like it would be a disservice to ignore the very big conversation going on right now. Not because it's like the popular thing to talk about, but it's just genuinely something important that needs to be discussed, whether we like it or not. And I think it's fair that we have this conversation, and having Juan here is definitely gonna be really nice because Juan, been around the block a lot more than I have, has more insight to share about the topic. But I don't know if you want to, because I know you talked about it yesterday, Juan, on your show. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if you want to go into it a little bit, like what actually is going on.
Sure. I think this is an ongoing conversation that, and again, what's frustrating about even delving into this topic is the sensitivity it requires. Obviously, we're talking very loosely about some very troubling trends in criminal activity, and we have to be sort of sensitive to those people who might. Again, I don't want to be so flippant and use a word like triggered, but we're going to be talking about how technology can be used to traffic and abuse people. At the same time, we also have to be a little sensitive for the platforms that share this content, because even just mentioning some of these topics can get content creators and producers like yourself into trouble with the platform's automated systems for trying to weed out this kind of conversation or this kind of activity. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the very topic of what Apple's trying to accomplish here, is because I don't think many of us have a lot of faith in automated systems to not have, or I should say, for automated systems to have foolproof recognition and protection capabilities.
Yeah.
So the reality of the world that we live in, when it comes to images of abuse and trafficking in this kind of data, basically every cloud service, through the terms of service, the end user licensing agreement that you sign up for, as soon as your data lives on someone else's hard drive, you are giving up a fair amount of privacy for the convenience of having access to that data over the cloud. This happens on iCloud, this happens on Google Drive, on OneDrive, on Amazon Cloud Services. Basically, they're allowed to peek in certain ways to verify that the information you're storing on their servers is compliant with law enforcement. And this is also like when iPhones back up to the cloud, Apple can be served a warrant to get that information off of their hard drives. It's technically in their control. It's your property in their hands. So there's a lot of legal wrangling about how far can you take encryption, how far can you protect user data, what types of policies we can employ for security. Why this move on the iPhone is so troubling to so many people is this is a type of scan which is now happening on the phone. This isn't just the same kind of security or policing that we see when it's on a cloud service. You buy a phone, you own the phone, and now Apple is saying, well, we can pre-scan for any troublesome or problematic content before it gets sent up to our cloud services. And for a lot of us in the tech space, this is raising some red flags. First of all, just speaking very broadly, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take anything I say as like legal grade advice. But when we talk about things like the right to privacy, illegal search or seizure, this is a component of your phone searching for illegal activity with no evidence that you have done anything illegal. There are going to be a lot of conversations from tech circles that are just very impressed with the kind of search that Apple is employing here, how they're circumventing some of the issues with data security and encryption, how this information is being stored on the phone. I mean, there are some really impressive ideas on display here, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how they're doing it. To me, the big concern is they are preemptively looking through your gadgets for any evidence of illegal activity. And in this initial push, Apple is sort of complying with the agencies that are tasked most heavily with trying to stop child trafficking and child abuse.
Yeah.
No one has a problem with that.
I'd be concerned if you did.
Right. No one is pro child abuse in this conversation. Anyone who is should be absolutely eviscerated by the law to the most tactical degree that our legal system can punish an individual like that. What we have a concern with, though, is the method and the apparatus by which they're doing this. And Apple has already shown that in order to sell more iPhones, they will completely comply with local and regional governments. Yeah. And if a government demands that, Apple compliance include, LGBT content as part of their filtering process, then anyone who is in any possession of any kind of LGBT content is going to be a criminal. And Apple will report on that individual. Yeah. It also becomes kind of the concern of a nanny state, where if you have a family account of Apple IDs and Apple iCloud accounts, if you have a minor and they're starting to explore some notion of themselves and they start taking photos or sharing content, Apple is going to utilize this type of hashing. And we should talk about hashing. And again, it is impressive how Apple is doing all of this. But again, the end result is Apple will create a system that will also narc on that individual through Apple's servers, where a human has to be a part of the chain of looking through this content and then report to that individual's parents. I am fairly technologically competent, and I feel I mean, I know my child is going to find ways to circumvent my rules on gadgets and electronics, but I also don't want a mega corporation in between me and my child, narking on my child, where she could be engaged in behavior that would normally just be a sticking point between me and her. But then at some point, law enforcement is getting involved because Apple is a part of this chain and is communicating with law enforcement agencies as to the quality of content that's being shared. And from there, again, Apple is engaged in a method of image and data verification where they can claim some kind of plausible deniability. Mm-hmm. We don't even know what the objectionable images are. This is coming from a database, from a foundation, from an organization that is vetting all of this for us, and we're just plugging in the numbers. So we're not, we're not the ones that are gatekeeping what is good and what is bad. But again, if that's the case, then it's really not a slippery slope argument to imagine that a different government can populate that objectionable data bucket with whatever kind of content they deem objectionable. Maybe it's journalists' data. Maybe it's an oppressive regime, and there are certain images from counter-revolutionaries that are trying to oppose this regime, and they can just put this all in the bucket, and then Apple will just automatically send them all of their data on this kind of troublesome information. It's properly a backdoor. It does circumvent encryption, so you can keep your data encrypted. There is still a data protection policy employed by Apple, but this kind of does an end run around it, and it creates a system where your phone reports on you. You don't get much insight as to what that process looks like. There's no transparency on how this mechanism actually operates. We don't have any data yet on what a false positive rate might be. If someone is accidentally put through the system of Apple saying you've got objectionable material, and at some point that had to be verified by someone in law enforcement, I don't want anyone to have to go through that process on accident. They say 1 in a trillion, but we also know that their estimates on Face ID were not as accurate as their marketing led them to suggest. And then also, there are trillions of images created. 1 in a trillion is actually not a great fail rate, considering the amount of digital media that gets created and shared.
Yeah. So if I wanted to say something, like pointing out like 2 main things, probably like to sum up for some people, I would say 2 of them mainly are like trust and mainly trust, and I would say trust and accountability with Apple, because it's like a lot of people, just being generally honest here, a lot of people in the current world that we live in don't really trust big tech organizations. They don't trust them with their data. They don't trust them with their privacy, even though, yes, Apple has shown some competency when it comes to privacy, like priding themselves and like, oh, we have, they can go on record and say we have the most secure platform if they wanted to. They always, that's one of the big things they always harp on during their presentations is, oh, you get the Apple privacy guarantee that we will protect your data.
And they spend an inordinate amount of money because, again, I feel like this is a conversation that evolved very rapidly after the San Bernardino shooter case. And this is something that's brought up very often. And it's why I think there's an emotional component where people like me have been so disappointed in Apple's stance on this policy. Is they were obstinate in opposing the FBI in cracking open and defeating the security of the iPhone. And I agreed with their stance on that. Their products are utilized in all walks of life, from general consumers to government to military. Anything that could potentially compromise the security of that device is a very significant threat to a huge swath of technology using populations. So then to see them kind of flip on this idea feels like an emotional betrayal. We had a pretty good sense that iCloud wasn't going to be encrypted end to end, so that law enforcement couldn't get to that data. From a legal standpoint, it makes sense that an organization like Apple or any cloud service provider can't perfectly obfuscate that data when it lives on their servers.
Yeah.
There's a hot potato ownership problem there, right? But when it comes to utilizing these services on the phone, that does feel like a betrayal of all of the marketing that we've seen. You know, Apple privacy, those giant billboards, what's on your iPhone stays on your iPhone, and all of the snide little kind of digs at companies like Google. You know, Google's just an advertising company and they sell off all your data. Again, that is so horrifically misrepresentative of the actual relationship. Google has every vested interest to keep your data locked up because their business model is working with advertisers. If advertisers could just get your data, Google wouldn't be able to sell their services. So again, it's in a way that some might find distasteful when we talk about online advertising, but Google has every interest and every monetized interest in keeping your data as buttoned up as they possibly can. But from there, now moving beyond web services, Android actually does represent in my opinion, a clearer choice in maintaining security and the integrity of your device. Your Android phones are not narking on you to Google. You know, there's more competition in the Android ecosystem where if Samsung employs a similar tactic to what Apple's doing, other manufacturers are going to step up and say, oh, but we don't do that. And so it's going to be a very different kind of conversation when these policies are pushed to Microsoft and Google. And we know that it's going to be caught up in this emotional marketing idea. You know, we've already seen that memo that was circulated to Apple employees where when the people started talking about this topic, you know, we had the EFF and we had security researchers that were all very concerned about this. And that memo describing them as the screeching minority of people. That is such an emotionally charged way to try and dismiss very valid concerns from some of the top security researchers in our country. So we know that there's going to be a side angle like, well, Google was already doing this too. Google is absolutely not scanning the content on your phones in this manner or in this fashion. This is unique. Apple took the first step. Well, I mean, I guess Google and Microsoft are just permissive of illegal activity on their platforms. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Again, the argument of protecting children is always kind of a hot button topic. And to me, this is being utilized like a dog whistle to activate something fairly insidious and rife for abuse on this platform. I feel like there's no way to kind of control against this if these kinds of tools are put into the hands of people that we genuinely don't like their politics or we genuinely don't like their agenda. You know, we've already seen like how the previous presidential administration was so aggressive at targeting certain news outlets and certain journalists and certain kinds of conversations and worked really hard to dismantle some of the protections for online media distribution. Had this tool come out during that previous presidential administration, I think it's safe to say they would have found some way to exploit it or abuse it. And that's here in the United States, let alone in other countries in the world that are now going to demand this kind of compliance from Apple while Apple tries to sell their products in those regions.
And this is where it's the whole premise of the idea of like that people say it's like, oh, everything always starts with a good intention. And this is like, and that's true. Like doesn't matter. Like any book relating to human actions, philosophy, like everything always starts with good intentions. But the second that somebody feels like, oh, this just doesn't work for me, brother. Like it's kind of funny, make a Hulk Hogan reference. Like the second that somebody feels like, okay, I can do this, but can I do more? And that's like, I get it. It's like, oh, you're starting to be a little bit superstitious. You know, you're starting to sound like Alex Jones here, but which, let's be real, some people have honestly been using that because some people are like, oh, why are you criticizing Apple for this? You can't criticize them. Like, are you just, you know, you sound like Alex Jones, or you sound like, you know, are you secretly a pedophile? Like, you know, and it's
right.
It's some of those things where
and those conversations often arrive in bad faith. I'm very wary of the slippery slope argument, because when we talk about it as a debate or a conversation fallacy, slippery slope is sort of described as you take one incident and then you lead it down sort of an unlikely chain of events to an absurd result. During when I was a kid, there were all the debates about, gay marriage. Well, if you let gay people get married, what's to stop, people having polygamous relationships with their pets? That is such an absurd chain of events that we would never get there. Your argument is only designed to trigger an emotional reaction from someone who has no concept of how ridiculous that chain is. What we're talking about here, Apple, so to describe the technology very, very quickly, and I'm oversimplifying, every piece of digital content has something called a hash. It's basically like a serial number that describes what that content is. And especially when you're working with a lot of code, if you're downloading programs and stuff, you want to make sure that the program you're downloading is actually the software that was described.
Yeah.
So you go to download an installer, you don't want to install malware. The developers put up a hash, and that should compare against what you've actually downloaded. And the same thing holds true for images, for videos, for text pieces and documents. In the past, let's say you had a photo of yourself. You took a selfie. Let's keep it simple. You take a selfie. That image has a hash. If you do any kind of change to that selfie, it's going to generate a new hash. So let's say you get your selfie, and all you do is you just brighten it up a little bit. If you just look at those serial numbers, they look like two completely unique, different pieces of media. But what Apple is doing with their system is, with this AI and machine learning hardware that lives on the phone, it is able to look at these different hashes and compare against very minute changes to say, no, these two images still resemble each other. And that's what's interesting, is that this is kind of a progressive or perceptual hashing of this data. And so Apple basically gets a list of all these serial numbers. They get a chart of all of the hashes that have already been created for objectionable content, for abusive content, and it compares perceptually through AI against these hashes. So it should do a better job of finding images that have maybe been subtly altered or cropped, or the colors have been changed, or any of these minor differences, where to the human eye, if you saw the two images, you would say those are almost identical images, but to a computer, the hashes are totally different. So, sorry, I kind of had to go down that just for the technology here. When we don't know what the hashes are, and Apple is claiming that this is some kind of a virtue of their platform. We don't even know, we don't even see the content. We can't even see the content. We don't know what the content of these hashes are. I think that is a system that could be abused very easily by a government putting other hashes into that bucket. Maybe the imagery is Black Lives Matter. Maybe the imagery is LGBTQ. Maybe the imagery is, anti-abortion or medical, medical issues, or any other type of data that some political entity might find objectionable. If Apple wants to keep selling products in our country, you've got to comply with our laws on this type of digital distribution. So we're going to add all of this content to the bucket too. So when we talk about slippery slope is usually referring to that absurd downhill travel to an unlikely conclusion. I think we can point to numerous governments around this planet where what they put in that bucket of illegal content is one step from where Apple is now. That is not an absurd drop into ridiculousness. That's literally the next use I can imagine for this technology, is going after political dissidents in an oppressive regime.
Especially with the society we live in. Let's be real. We're not going to pretend that we live in some utopia, because let's be real, utopia realistically here is not going to happen. But there are countries around the world that have very strict views on certain things. Like you mentioned, like gay marriage or Black Lives Matter. Like, let's just be honest here. Like the biggest offender that comes to everybody's mind is like China or Russia. Like these big countries that have well documented history, which we're not going to pretend like they don't, because their history,
we've already, I mean, not to interrupt for too long here, but we've already seen a trend where for Apple to remain compliant in countries like Russia and China, they've already adopted strategies that they would never do here in the United States. Russia just recently instituted a policy of all new smartphone purchasing had to require certain pre-installed Russian-developed apps. And again, why is that so critical to a sale in Russia? The concern is that information is being trafficked on Russian servers to keep track of people in very specific ways. And Apple, for their marketing here in the United States, is compliant with selling that kind of a device in Russia.
And that's what people can argue. This is almost like a deal with the devil, for lack of better terms, is like, in order to do business with some of these countries to get access to their, fairly big markets, you got to do a little bit of a deal with the devil. And same thing that happened with, like Blizzard a long time ago with the whole controversy with the Hong Kong. And then obviously the whole stuff with Taiwan right now, when, they don't agree with people saying that, oh, Taiwan's not a nation, even though, buds, I don't know about that one. But we look at this situation, I know some people think we're like, can sound crazy because people just don't, they keep liking to go down to the extremes and go down the slippery slopes. But we should be generally concerned whether you like it or not, because we also live in a society where, yes, people can be falsely accused of things. It would be ludicrous to assume that this never, no, everyone that's been accused of something is always no. We've seen instances, and time again, there have been people that, have been accused of something that they didn't do. And
it definitely brings up, again, it's always, I think, helpful to push back against the lazier arguments, things like, well, if you've got nothing to hide, if you're not doing anything criminal, going through this process can be extremely emotionally disruptive. Again, let's say I've got photos of my daughter playing in a bathtub, and heaven forbid something line up with some type of abusive imagery that sets off a few red flags. At some point in this chain, who are we using to verify the image? Why would my daughter's private bath time photo that I shared with my wife over iMessage or something like that, why would that be viewed by someone off-site? I believe in this first implementation of this, the people vetting these images are likely going to have to be law enforcement, just because they're the only ones that will be legally allowed to kind of sift through this kind of media, the way that we kind of put up these protections against abusive imagery. It's highly illegal to own it, so it's going to have to be someone in law enforcement. But after some point, if the quantity of data to verify becomes too high, I can't envision any type of solution other than, sort of exporting those jobs to other regions in a similar fashion to the way that Facebook does verification on potentially abusive or troubling imagery. There's just so much content that gets made and so much content that gets shared. At some point, humans are inefficient at judging and verifying it well. You just have to go through so much of the absolute worst media that humanity can create, and it creates substantial issues with mental health, with digital distribution, with international laws on trafficking this data. It's a huge mess to employ when it's also preemptive. Again, we're not going after people that are suspected of trafficking this media. We are pre-scanning the media on every citizen and every consumer's device and trying to root out where it might come from. The reason this is also problematic is because I think the people that are most inclined to traffic this media have already moved beyond using these types of automated cloud services. The database of imagery is already established. So we're not looking for new content. We're looking for content that's already been created. There is no AI that can predict if a new image of a child is abusive imagery, because we can't train a model in machine learning to predict the future. Like it's only effective at content that's already been generated. And it's very easily disabled in this incarnation, where if you are already inclined to traffic in this kind of imagery, then you've already stopped using iCloud anyway.
Yeah.
So there really isn't a part of this that seems effective. It seems like a huge mess for compliance. It's likely going to result in a number of false positives, and people will be put through a process of being accused of trafficking in objectionable material. And at the end of the day, this is another component that's operating on your phone. So how do those hashes get stored if it's all being scanned on device? Is that eating into the storage of your phone? Is that utilizing the processor and the battery of your phone? How often is your device going to get scanned? There are so many. Again, I think it's admirable that Apple forces Facebook to tell you what Facebook needs access to on your phone. I think it's reprehensible that Apple does not hold themselves to the same standard of how your data will be utilized, will be scanned, will be sorted, and will be approved, not just for the legal implications, not just for the ethical implications or the moral or emotional implications, literally into how hard is it going to use your phone in the process of verifying all of this.
Because that's an issue too, is the fact that you just don't get a choice in the matter. Because the whole premise, like we were mentioning, is that it always starts with a good intention. And obviously the intention in this case is to protect children and protect them from abuse, because obviously child trafficking is still a very big issue in the world right now, whether, it's sad, but it is true. But this is, like you were mentioning, is how like Apple made a big thing with Facebook, where like, look, Facebook has to reveal to you what data is it trying to get access to, and then also gives the option, do you want them to be able to track you throughout different apps? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are gonna click no. But the big issue here is you don't get a choice in the matter. Right. And that's what a lot of people don't like, especially in the society we live in. Just people in general like having options. It's just a natural thing that people like, the ability to choose, especially since that's something that you generally can control in life, is you get to choose the choices that you make. And if this is a choice like, hey, I don't want to let this happen, I don't want this, running in the background, I don't want this happening on my device, then some people are like, you should be given the option to say, no, I will not allow it.
Right. And to Apple's, to the conversation that we're seeing early coming from, leaked memos, again, Apple hasn't made a public statement like this, but as far as Apple's been concerned in terms of antitrust and other investigations into their business practices, their choice is you leave. Yeah. According to Apple, well, just go buy a different phone. You don't need to have an iPhone if this is what bothers you. And I feel like that's a false equivalency. I feel like that's a false choice. If you have invested a significant amount of time and effort into iOS or iPad OS as a platform, it is insufficient for Apple to say, oh, but just throw all that away. That's fine. You can always choose just to leave instead of trying to reform how that company does business. It's always interesting to me because, again, so much of this is wrapped up in the emotions of marketing, and Apple has been, I think, the most effective at turning tech into a feel-good lifestyle image. They're the closest, I feel, that tech has come to becoming like a lifestyle or a fashion brand. But again, you have to weigh those emotions and the feel goods of owning Apple products against some of their more recent business practices, things like opposing right to repair legislation and lobbying against it, how they didn't disclose problematic apps on the App Store that potentially breached over 120 million iPhone owners' data, but they didn't disclose that to the affected individuals. Or even just recently, AirTags. Again, AirTags, they opt you into a network of location tracking. So even if you don't use AirTags, your location is tracked to aid in the recovery of someone else's content, and you don't opt in. You were opted in automatically. And again, this is just another step in what I feel are some very problematic business practices.
And I like how you mentioned that too, because let's be real here. There's going to be a lot of Apple apologists. Like, let's just be real here. There's people that are going to echo, like you mentioned, is because people, when it comes to piece of technology, when it comes to anything, books, technology, even like, for me, like this little bracelet I have on me, they're emotionally attached. Like for me, like I'll just use an example, like the little bracelet. People keep asking me, Josh, why are you wearing a bracelet? And I'm like, to me, this bracelet was the last thing my grandmother ever gave to me. It was the last thing that I have of my grandmother. So to me, I'm emotionally invested in this. Like I have a lot of sentiment for this item. So to me, to some people might be like, why do you care about this? It's a bracelet. It's like, yeah, it's a gold bracelet. It looks nice. Like, what? It's for your girlfriend or something? I'm like, no. First off, I'm single. But to me, it's a memory of someone that's no longer here. Sure. And I can't get this ever again. And like for a lot of people, when it comes to technology, like they say, yeah, bro, like the Apple ecosystem is my life. Like it's part of my identity. And it's like, and so
yeah, heaven forbid you start showing up as a green bubble on someone else's iPhone, right? I mean, that would be the worstest thing ever. Although I will say, if you haven't been checking out RCS on Android devices, it's gotten really good. So I feel like Apple is actually now falling behind on the messaging battle. But I digress.
For me, it's interesting because I see a lot of people, like what you mentioned is like with Apple, and rather than people saying, hey, Apple, maybe you should consider changing your business practices, or maybe consider other alternatives. Like if people are genuinely bothered by this, maybe there should be a change in how we go about things. But instead, people are like, no, Apple's just going to do the way they do things, and we're just going to be okay with it and just take it raw with no Vaseline. And it's just, there's better ways of going about it. Like, because that's obviously, this can go into huge debate between like Android and iOS, where in the Android space, there's more options, there's diversity, while in iOS, you're stuck with one manufacturer that controls the entire chain, top to bottom. And yes, you get a choice by picking which model you want, but at the end of the day, it's still the exact same thing. Unlike, in the Android space where, yes, you have different manufacturers that prioritize different things. There's different styles that go with it. And obviously with this year being I wouldn't say a big year for Android, but I think obviously with Google, with the Pixel 6 coming out, that people are really excited for, given that now Google is giving their first, shot at making their own processors, which, let's be real, we kind of saw this coming. Like a lot of manufacturers are starting to go in this direction to like, okay, we're going to do everything in-house. We're going to do it on our own, because Apple's been doing it for, well, obviously with TSMC, but same difference. But, having their own proprietary chip and looking at all of this, it's just like you mentioned with AirTags. I didn't actually know about that. Like,
yeah, the network
come to my mind.
So again, I mean, Apple's moves, I feel, do actually step into some FTC style concerns over anti-competitive business practices. Imagine, what's the name of that other company that makes those little Bluetooth? Tile. So imagine. I almost
forgot about them.
Yeah. So, but Tile created a business model, and Tile created a network where you install the Tile app on your phone, and you opt in to their network, and your Bluetooth connection and your geolocation data can be used to help find other people's stuff. Apple copied and pasted that entire business model for AirTags, but they could also leverage the entire iOS and iPad OS ecosystem. So, when you do Find My Phone on an iPhone, that is now wrapped up into the AirTag. They've stapled it together, so you can't really untangle it. You can't separate it. So now, if you ever lose your phone and you want to have it found again, you tacitly have to participate in the entire AirTag distribution. So Apple has an unfair advantage in being able to force all of their iPhone and iPad consumers into this network, where Tile can't, and rightfully shouldn't be able to force everybody who has a phone to participate with their Tile network. To me, that is a clear example of an anti-competitive business practice, being able to leverage an ecosystem of products and force people into those systems where their competitors can't participate to that same degree. And it's a great business for Apple. They're going to sell a ton, and it's going to enrich the Apple ecosystem. But again, at the same time, they don't hold themselves to the same standard that they hold Facebook and Tile and all of these other competitors. They couldn't get Spotify under control. They made Apple Music as a streaming platform instead of a music sales platform. They couldn't keep Netflix sales going through the iOS App Store. They came up with Apple TV. So far, Apple's recent incarnation of strategies and business practices has been to copy competitors, lock people into these ecosystems, and try and chill competition from outside. We have to kind of weigh that emotion. We have a feeling Apple will do the right thing. I feel like this is another step where we're being shown that Apple as a corporate entity is obviously not an altruistic entity. They're looking at what's going to generate the best possible margins, the best possible sales, access to the largest groups of consumer demographics. And especially as we look at how Apple operates with governments around the world, I feel there's enough here to be concerned about their business practices. When apps show up that have malware in the App Store, Apple has a vested interest in not alerting their consumers because they've already marketed so heavily on how perfect their platform is and how this is the right way to do it. And you can't have an outside app store, security and privacy, blah, 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 blah. So if anything were to come out that would sort of deflate that marketing, instead of making a big show out of how they're trying to tackle a problematic or a malware situation, they bury it. When there are issues with device reliability, you're holding it wrong, and don't worry, it's not a problem. And then after those products start falling out of the support window for your warranty, well, maybe we'll do a recall for like the 10 people that still have them 3 years after it was a relevant situation. This is another example of them fighting against right to repair legislations. This has become a company that I feel has gotten so large and is still trying to demonstrate growth and improving profitability. An issue like this, coming back to the main point where we're talking about compromising your privacy, becomes even more of an issue. I do not trust that this current flavor of Apple is going to be able to mitigate the potential harms or the potential abuse of this system. But it's going to be really good for their bottom line if they get access to more consumers because of this kind of security compliance.
Especially like thinking about it, I know you and me haven't had that personal conversation of like why I switched from engineering to business, but I primarily switched to marketing. Mm-hmm. And for me, looking at all this, like people have asked me, like, I know you're probably like, how does this all relate? But we'll swing it all around like a good old baseball bat trying to hit a home run. But I switched to marketing, and then people asked me, what do you want to do? And I told them, for me personally, when it comes to marketing, my mind immediately goes to like Apple's marketing team, because I've seen firsthand how this marketing team is able to do a job that not many other companies are able to do. That you can literally see the Apple logo, and because of how well the marketing team has, let's just be honest, they've done a great job. I'm not going to say, oh no, the marketing team is dog. I'm like, no, it's clearly a very successful team because they know what they're doing. We're not like, they clearly have an understanding of how to, I don't want to say manipulate, but they know how to draw the emotions from you. They know how to get your attention. They know.
That's what good marketing is. Yeah.
It's what it is. Good marketing requires you to drag somebody's attention. It's the same thing that goes with public speaking. Like, you have to be able to draw people in. Like, if people are drawn in by the words that you are saying, then you're doing a good job. However, the problem with all the marketing is, while you can do a good job, it always comes down to the intentions behind it. Like, and I'm not going to go on a limb and say Apple's intent is malicious in this, because no, like I would be ludicrous to say that, because I don't know.
This is what's so problematic about using this kind of emotional, again, like you were saying, I don't even want to call them Apple apologists at this point anymore. It's just, it's a foregone conclusion that if you talk about Apple on YouTube, you will be more successful with your YouTube videos because of the interest already baked into Apple products. We're trying to apply a human motivation to a $1 trillion corporation. There is no motivation for $1 trillion corporation other than to secure future profits and pay off current investments. That's it. That's it. There is no friend. There is no adversary. Apple is not my nemesis. They are a $1 trillion corporation, which is looking at maximizing shareholder profits and utilizing their investments to also try and prevent competition in key sectors of the market. That's it. Anything else is the emotion of the person talking about Apple. It has nothing to do with the motivations of Apple.
And that's because I get it. Like, when I look at this entire situation, it definitely, a lot of people will say it's fueled by emotion. It's just fueled by speculation. It's fueled by conspiracies. Like, people think that, the Apple is just going to go downhill and but I'm like, well, no, we've seen time and time again that this is a company that has a standard for how other people should do things. But when it comes to them, they're like, I don't think we should follow our own standard, And it's one of those things where they're very hypocritical in this situation. We're not going to beat around the bush. And some people are like, oh, Josh, you're just hating on Apple. It's like, no, we've seen time and time and time again. Like, being honest, some people thought I was an apologist for Google and Facebook, saying, oh, you should trust them with your privacy rather than Apple. And I'm like, first off, I've never gone on record and said that. I have always said, when it comes to privacy, Facebook is the absolute worst. We all know this. Like, there's people that still use Facebook, but a lot of people are starting to switch away from it because of the whole privacy concerns, which, let's be real, they've always been there. With Google, like you mentioned, they don't benefit with just selling off all your info, because then they wouldn't be needed anymore. They wouldn't be profitable. So there actually has to be protection. Like, they're invested in keeping your information because, obviously online advertising is also another slippery slope, because some people will be like, well, it's very much. It can be.
And again, we're talking about another $1 trillion corporation. So their motivations are not altruistic. I'm not ascribing Google to any type of heroic stance on this, but the reality of this is different than the marketing perception. And the way that Apple talks about privacy is very emotionally charged and doesn't fully live up. I mean, their actual business practices don't fully line up with the marketing message that they put out there. And when you really try and think, if we're kind of trading conspiracy hats back and forth between these different organizations, what is the end game if Google is cavalier with your data? That's not the business that they're selling. Actually, Facebook is a very good model of, we want to make the leakiest data portal possible, and then we're giving individual bad actor developers access to that through our platform. And that's genuinely one of the major ways that Facebook makes money. You're completely different implementations of a data-driven economy when you look at Facebook versus Google. But again, I mean, coming back to Apple, it's troubling, because Apple has been at the forefront of so many consumer tech conversations. They've been ahead of the curve on getting more sort of daily driver tech into people's hands. They definitely still carry a reputation for making this stuff very accessible, very easy to use. But their recent, and I would say over the last couple of years, the recent trend and the changes in their business model, I feel have escalated the sort of profit seeking and the motivation for why they engage in these types of business practices the way that they do. And I think that some of this is also in reply to like the recent lawsuit, Apple and Epic fighting against Fortnite. Well, this definitely strikes at the core of Apple's developer business model. And if anything sort of cuts into the incredible profits that they make off of distributing software where they're not really responsible for anything. All they're doing is operating as a gatekeeper in between a developer and an iPhone user. And that's it. All you're doing is paying your 30% for access. Then Apple has to look at future monetization strategies. And if there's a market where they can't sell iPhones because they're not compliant with very restrictive regime, well, this is an opportunity for them to crack that market and sell more iPhones and offset the potential losses of having to comply with anti-competitive or anti-consumer regulations on App Store models. Again, that's not a wacky, wild, out there, fly to the moon conspiracy theory. That's like literally just looking at the last fiscal sales quarter, seeing how is Apple going to make more money year over year, and then trying to predict, well, what's one opportunity that they might have sitting on the table? Oh yeah, if they can't sell iPhones in this country, this would be a way for them to, sort of encourage a relationship with that country's government.
And it's one of those things, like you mentioned a little bit earlier, like the whole debacle with Spotify, or Spotify, Apple Music, or Netflix and Apple TV. Another example, like you mentioned, Apple Arcade. Like Apple Arcade was literally designed to screw with all the streaming services. Like,
well, and at the same time, while they were developing a platform for game distribution, they were actively fighting against any other type of game streaming service. No Google Stadia, no Nvidia, no Microsoft Xbox, Game Pass. They preemptive, they chilled an emerging market. And to me, that also strikes at the heart of like net neutrality policy. If a manufacturer or an ISP or a carrier can disrupt a business model, then I don't believe they're acting in good faith for consumers. I feel they are using their market position as an unfair advantage, and they're likely influencing the legal system to kind of curry favor and to kind of point their business model in direction, or I say point the laws around in the direction of what's going to be most beneficial to their business models.
And making a good point with that, people need to realize that these companies are not your friends. I know you've talked about this multiple times. I've said this multiple times. A lot of people have said this multiple times. These companies do not genuinely care about what is best for you. On some people can say, well, they probably do. I'm like, no. When it comes to big trillion-dollar tech corporations, as long as you have their products in your possession, that's all they care about. And as long as they can milk you for as much money as they possibly can. Mm-hmm. Yes, will they do whatever they can to keep you happy? On occasions, yes, if they just genuinely care, if they genuinely just
if it's good for business.
If it's good for business. If they generally just don't give a rat's ass, then they generally won't give a rat's ass. And that's the cold, hard reality that we need to realize, that these companies are not our friends. We should not be defending companies for practices that are questionable. Like I've always been told this, like, especially like with my type of job that I do here on campus, if something sounds like a pretty bad idea, chances are it is a bad idea. And you probably should tell someone about it. Like we're told that in our trainings, like, especially because I'm half asleep during my trainings. And so is my supervisor, which is hilarious. But that's always been my mindset when I think of things, is when something sounds like it doesn't sound like something doesn't sit well with me, there means that there definitely is something under the surface that we need to discuss and that needs to be brought up. Because when this type of situation arose, like look at this situation, it's the same situation that happened when the AirTags came out, the same situation with the butterfly keyboards with the right to repair, and Apple was like, sucks to suck, bud. Too bad. If you bought one of these, well, you want the fix, we'll sell you the new ones with new keyboards. And it's just like, and then the whole idea of being in this system where, oh, if you don't like what we do, just sell all your stuff and then go to a different brand. And it's like, a lot of people can't do that. Like that's like saying a working professional, they're like, oh, they have a camera brand. They're like, oh, you don't like what we did? Oh, well, sorry, just sell all your stuff and then go to like, a lot of people can't do that. And the reality is a majority of the people can't do that. A lot of people can't just go up, sell their stuff, because people don't seem to realize it. Selling goods is not the easy. Like, I know it sounds like it's easy, but it's like to generally make a profit to be able to buy new things to replace it. It's not as easy as it looks. We're just being honest here. As someone that's done it a good amount, it's not as easy as it looks.
Yeah.
For me, like some people have said, Josh, why don't you try switching to macOS? You do a lot of creative work now. And I'm like, well, that's easier said than done, whether you like it or not. Like, I can't just go out, buy me a iMac or buy me a MacBook Pro with everything that I need to do my job. And I'm like, I literally have everything right here in front of me that does everything I want it to do and then some. Like, granted, yes, in my computer, like as a Windows user, I would like to have a new GPU, but given the current state of the market, that ain't happening anytime soon, which sucks. Yeah, but I'm okay with it.
It's tough, and again, I think it's a very kind of flip or dismissive kind of reply, because a lot of this is going to descend into some of the most obnoxious sort of whataboutisms or hot takes, or like you were saying with apologists. Like I'm not particularly interested in how cool this methodology is, because from an actual, from a science nerd, former computer programmer perspective, like what Apple's doing is incredible. I mean, it really is. It's fascinating. The research is amazing. This is an aggressive use of machine learning hardware, these neural cores or these tensor cores, whatever we're going to be calling them, for automating certain services on a mobile device. My problem isn't how. I'm not impressed by how. My main concern is that they did it at all. Again, a lot of people are going to find this conversation and react with apathy. Well, I mean, nothing's private anymore anyway. It's like anything else. Like, it can always get worse.
That's the big thing that people don't realize, is it can get worse.
And we're still at it.
Say that it doesn't, but
no, and we're still at a beautiful consumer precipice where you were mentioning with some of the changing, especially over generations of consumers, some of the changing attitudes on social media services and younger people being wary of organizations like Facebook, that we still have plenty of room to kind of walk back and redefine our relationships with gadgets and technology and information services. The next phase of the internet will not be built on the same kind of free to use, but you're the product kind of model, if we push back enough. And there's always room for change. It's like, oh, you can't put that genie back in the bottle is such a stupid, useless contribution to this conversation, because it's all or nothing in that scenario. It's black or white. It's 0 or 100%.
Yeah, like Pandora's box. Like everyone likes to use that example.
And you open it, and now, I guess we already opened it and everything sucks. What we're talking about is degrees of change. And what Apple is trying to institute here, I think, is a step too far for any type of data security, privacy policy. I feel it's rife for abuse. And I think it betrays one of the last bastions of privacy. Like, your phone is basically a cyborg implant in this modern economy. It is the keeper of all of your most private moments, of all of your most private information, your most private data, and anything that compromises that sort of walled garden of you, I think should be, tactically, critically examined and dissected to see how it works and to see how far it might go. And I just don't believe the conversation is in earnest if we've got a bunch of techies who've kind of built their channels on consumer conversations and stuff, trying to write off these concerns. Apple's going to do just fine. I don't believe that's ever an acceptable joiner to this conversation. I think it always needs more scrutiny than that.
Yeah, and I actually just thought of something too that came to mind when people talk about privacy, that, oh yes, if you're online, you use the internet, then you don't have any privacy. Like, prime example, like something that Snapchat recently did. I actually just saw this myself, where Snapchat now, if you use it and you go into your astrology, like where it talks about your astrology profile, at the bottom under where it says your birthday, it's like, hey, you want to like put a little cake right next to your thing where it tells people about that's your birthday. Under it, now it actually tells you the exact time you were born, the day you were born, the year you were born, and where you were born. And I was like, there's no way. I thought, in my perspective, I thought there's no way this is true. I looked at it and it told me where I was born. Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I was born at Fort Lauderdale, Florida at 12:30 midnight, or 12:30 in the morning. But I was just like, oh my God, this. And I'm like, how in the blue hell did this thing get this information? Because I was like, this information's only on my birth certificate. And the internet is definitely a very interesting place, especially because, like you mentioned, like, oh my Lord.
Do you need to get going?
Of course. We always like to have a little bit of fun around here. All right, everybody. I do apologize for that.
That was exciting. I was excited.
Right? It's like, totally. Let's just set off the alarms.
Am I in danger? Do I need to evacuate? What's going on?
Bro, they don't. Let's be real. They don't care about us. They only hire the finest of upright citizens to work in this facility.
Of course.
I say that now. My supervisor's like, totally, and my supervisor might have slightly alluded she's done some things under the sun, and I'm like, well, man, you're just a new college grad, so I don't hold anything against you. I'm like, I'm a nice, innocent citizen, totally innocent citizen right here.
For sure.
Haven't done anything illegal. So,
well, I mean, we were talking about like, Apple's data security and privacy policy. So they were obviously trying to shut down your show. They couldn't handle it.
Let's be real. Like the amount of times that people like, there's always has to be something that happens during these episodes that just makes me question life some days. Even though that, like, swear if my supervisors hear me saying that stuff like, that's a report, I was student concern. I'm like, dude, I'm fine. Like, we're all fine. It's just, dude, we're all screwed up in the head. Let's just be real here. We all are. There's something at least wrong with us, guaranteed. Right. But back to the topic at hand. It's definitely one of those things where we look at this entire situation. It's like, I get it. The idea that this could be used to protect children, the whole, nursery mode and all this other stuff. Yes, we like the idea. We like the idea of protecting children. But we would also be extremely naive to pretend that this can't go downhill. Like, it very well can. Like, it's not even like, oh, this is just Alex Jones level. No, it's like, we've seen that there's countries that can clearly exploit this. And if Apple wants to do business in said countries, who's to say that those restrictions are adding in like political opposition? Like, oh, if you see photos talking about uprisings or photos talking about, oh, we need a new person in office. Who's to say that those countries might not put that in the dotted line and say, hey, we see that you have this technology. We've seen how it's implemented. We just want to add to it a little bit just so you can sell in our market. And it's, let's be honest, Apple's a business here. And if it means getting access to billions of sales, they'll take it. And that some people will be like, no, they won't. And I'm like, well, they would.
Again, I kind of feel like there's like a reading rainbow moment to kind of cap some of this conversation. You don't have to take our word for it. No, I feel like there are some very valid concerns on the implementation of this, the transparency of this, how cagey Apple has been more with the marketing kind of presentation of this, as opposed to actually detailing what the nuts and bolts of this mechanism will resemble. And I'm never impressed when the answer is, well, if we can't tell you how it works because then people might try to defeat it. And you're like, yeah, that's security through obfuscation like that is never effective, and it's never a good strategy in the long run. So I would anyone who's kind of curious on what some more learned and wiser security people might have to say about this, I'd start with the EFF.org, and read some of their reactions to this policy. I've done some interviewing on organizations that work really hard to try and stop the spread of abusive imagery and trafficking. And I completely appreciate and understand why they've been so supportive of this endeavor from Apple. It's a scourge. It's a terrible, terrible aspect of our of humanity. That there are individuals who get into this idea of abuse. But this actual implementation is something I'm very concerned about for all of the other ramifications of what it might do. And also, I feel like this is one of those situations where detailing the structure of how it works would also lead us to seeing how effective it might be. We won't know how effective this is if it's a magic black box that even Apple can't really see inside. We won't know if we'll be compromising our privacy for an effective strategy. Again, I feel like there are a number of people who would like to contribute to stopping this kind of content distribution, but not if it's ineffective. You know what I mean? This is a huge and profound challenge, but I feel like we're kind of going after the avenues of distribution that have already been ignored by the people most likely to create this content, where again, this strategy won't help stop the creation of this content. So this is a huge and difficult and horrific law enforcement challenge. And I have every sympathy and every kind of commiseration for the organizations around the world that are trying to work with law enforcement to stop this. I don't think this is going to be the strategy that helps significantly stem the tide of child abuse and of human trafficking.
And I think that's the overarching big theme of this is I don't want anybody to feel like that what we're saying here is the be all end all, that this is the solution to the issue. No, this is not something that's so easy to say, okay, here's the fix, or okay, we should or we shouldn't. It's definitely one of those things where, one, we don't know how the system actually will be in practice because, well, it's not in practice right now. So we don't know how effective it is. So let's keep that in mind. We don't know how effective it is. On paper, it already sounds concerning. For some people, everyone's obviously going to keep having their own opinions, and that's fine. Everyone's allowed to have their own opinions. We're not going to pretend that they can't. But we also don't want to be very naive in this situation and pretend like there aren't some concerns. Because if something genuinely bothers you about this whole situation and this whole implementation of this technology, then chances are there's something that concerns you, and we're not going to pretend that you shouldn't be concerned. If you're concerned, you should be concerned. If you're not concerned, I'm not going to make you feel like you should be.
There are concerns, and then there are concerns. And one of the reasons why I feel this conversation has garnered so much traction in the tech community is there are some policies where kind of a wait and see approach, I think, is valid. Let's try this new thing and let's see how it plays out, and then let's see how the market reacts or responds to this. Such a unilateral decision from Apple on this, in such a way that it's so easy to imagine potential abuse of this situation, is one of those that I don't feel it's a good idea to give it a try, let it get normalized in society, and then 10 years from now we're wondering like, well, how could we not have seen that it was all going to go so wrong? I feel that there is a good faith argument against this kind of policy, and examining it more granularly before we throw it on everybody's device. This is one of those where I feel the maybe give it a chance and let's see how bad could it really be is not the approach we should be taking.
Sounds like a terrible idea, especially when we're talking about how many billions of users. Like it'd be different if it was like 1 to 3, like a handful or a very small sample size of 1,000, but you're talking about billions of people. And
but then also just think of the ridiculousness of that pitch. Hey, we here at Apple, we want to try a pilot program. You're going to be one of 1,000 people, and we're going to see if you're a criminal. Right? Would you sign up for that study? Would you be a part of that just to see like, hey, can you find any CSAM on your phone? Sure, Apple, I'm going to be a part of that. When you boil it down to like, let's say you and 10 friends were selected by Apple to get a new software update on your phone, and the whole point of the software update is to dig through your phone to see if you're doing anything illegal. If you point blank put those 10 people in a room, I don't believe those 10 people would jump at the chance for that new Apple software to be installed on their phone. But for some reason, when we talk about this conceptually as affecting potentially billions of people, those numbers are too big for our evolved primate brains to really encapsulate. But I want you to just put 5 friends in a room and then say, I'm going to put your phone in a little box so that only I can see the screen, and you're going to let me just look through all of your photos. No, I mean, you can totally trust me. I'm a dude on the internet, right? I hate boiling it down to such a ridiculous, kind of absurdist kind of situation,
like way of doing things.
But the process that Apple is engaging in here eventually does need some human review. It will eventually need to be detailed. Law enforcement eventually will get involved, and we don't know the criteria that can be added to this platform or program in the future. And if you're uncomfortable about the idea, or take me out of the equation and make it a cop. So you get 10 of your friends from college, you put them in a room, and a cop says, I get to look through your photos. Don't worry. I mean, I'm totally cool. I'm a police officer. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm looking for. If we're not okay with that, I don't feel we should be okay with Apple's one step removed automated policy that will eventually get law enforcement involved if they happen to find anything.
Which is the concern, because I get it. Everyone talks about, like, someone mentioned, and I know we can end on this one, like people mentioned, like, what about memes and stuff like that? Or, you know, like in your case, you're a father. You have pictures of your daughter, and not anything explicit, because definitely not. You're a father, like just generally capturing moments of your daughter. What are the odds that the person that's going to manually review this, because they have said there, if something gets flagged in the system, someone will manually review this. What are the odds that this person is going to be able to properly identify if this is exploitation, or is this just, oh, it's just a dad taking a picture of his daughter, like, you know, just the keepsake?
Where again, we have to dedicate those resources from law enforcement. And honestly, rather than reacting to individual potential images on consumer devices, I feel the resources of law enforcement are better spent on proactively trying to root out the rings and the societies of people that create this content, that traffic people, that are responsible at the top for the generation of this content. I want so much more of the manpower of law enforcement being focused on that tier. You know, again, it's kind of like, you know, drug busts. You know, I care a lot less about the individual on a street corner, you know, selling a couple dime bags than I do about the massive organization at the top of the hill that is responsible for so much more human suffering. Where I want my tax dollars to go is up the chain, not, you know, trying to take out all of the individuals at the very, very bottom who contribute very, very little to human suffering.
Almost like you're dealing with the surface level of the iceberg rather than noticing everything
underneath. Right.
And that's definitely the biggest concern with this entire situation, is this situation using the child, like, you know, protecting children, everything almost seems like it's just the tip of the water. You look under the water, it's dark, it's moody, it's not as clear cut as you want it to be. And that's the concerns that we're expressing here, is that this isn't clear cut, like, oh no, altruistic, this is going to work, this is going to be great. No, there's concerns, and this can be, and we're not saying it will be, but it could be exploited. And that's what we want people to understand, that this isn't something that's just foolproof, that no one will ever abuse this. No, it can. History has shown that when you give somebody a lot of power, things can go downhill really quickly. We're not going to pretend like it has. History has shown time and time again, when you give someone so much power over people, they're either going to get corrupt with it and do whatever they want, and things are just going to hit the fan. Now, we're not saying that will happen, but history has shown when stuff like this happens, it doesn't usually go in a favorable route. It can be good. There's good examples of it, but there's also bad, and we're not going to ignore those. We have to be in the middle, be objective, and understand, look, there's good and bad to this. However, right now there's a lot of bad concerns, and we're not gonna, and I don't think it's wise, because I feel like it'd be misinformation to push that, oh, if you think this is a bad idea, then you should be silenced. No one should listen to what you have to say. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're supposed to do. We should be presenting the information the way it actually is, and not just be like, oh no, you shouldn't be worried about this. Like, when, you know, and then in your own like logic loophole, the whole mental gymnastics you have to do to justify your point, you're like, well, it does worry me a little bit, but you shouldn't be worried at all, you know, because you know, and it's just,
and again, it speaks to some of the conversations we've also had about marketing, about YouTube, about how people profit off of this content, you know, and there's a very solid business strategy for making a YouTube channel where you say nice things about Samsung and Apple, because you know that's going to reach the broadest chunk of consumers. They're going to be happy that you said nice things about the products they own. They're going to watch more of your videos, and you're going to make more money. So again, I feel like looking at where the conversation is coming from, how impressed they are with the various technologies employed. Instead, I'd really want to point someone to the EFF.org. I mean, not the EFF.org. Go to EFF.org. That's the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I always want to reverse the F's. But check out, they have an article talking about this. This is a way to circumvent encryption. It is a way to open up a potential backdoor on a device. And I think they do a very good job of citing sources, researchers' concerns, and then their own policy and platform concerns over this potential strategy from Apple.
And I'll definitely be leaving a link down below for everyone, whether you're listening to this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on YouTube. I'll be leaving this down below for you guys so you guys can go check it out yourself. But thank you, Juan. Thank you so much for your time. I know this is the longest episode we've done in a while again, but I know every time Juan comes by, it's always for a long chat.
I talk a lot. I mean, it's kind of the problem with having me on. You got to space me out.
And I do the same thing too. But Juan, thank you so much. I know everyone's going to really appreciate listening to you share your insight on this. I know you did this on your podcast as well, yesterday, or at the time of this recording yesterday, but when it goes live, it'll be Monday because Juan does his show on Mondays. But thank you, Juan. I really do appreciate it. And for everyone listening to this podcast, thank you guys so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. I know it's a bit of a long one, and hopefully you listen to it maybe while working out, which I listen to podcasts and videos while I'm working out because it helps me get through it. But if you're listening to this, thank you guys. If you're watching this, I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Again, every reasonable link will be left down below so you guys can go check it out. But until next time, guys, I love you guys to death. Please be safe, guys. And as always, don't do anything dumb. I will see you guys next week. Bye, guys.
Hey there. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day and listening to today's episode. If you're interested in supporting the show, whether it be financially, clicking the follow button, or just sharing the episode, it all works for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for your time, and I love you guys to death.